Allergy season is upon us, and it's getting more intense by the week. Joining me now, Dr. Lilly Hwang with Atlanta Allergy and Asthma to talk about how you can combat it and how allergy season is changing over time. So it is mid-March, Dr. Hwang, and people who are seasonal sufferers, they're feeling it.
Oh yes, it is. It's really interesting because, we tell patients year after year that it's coming earlier, and we're seeing that. And we've now got studies that show we are increasing our allergy days. We're increasing what they call freeze-free days. And we're seeing them, I move it, 2 weeks. Sometimes I have to say, start your medicine. We used to say, oh, you're fine in April. Now we're saying start in mid-March. And now we're saying, you probably need to start, mid-February to cover yourself for the times where the pollen's going to be really high.
And the pollen that spikes in the spring, what type of pollen is that?
So the pollens that we see in the spring are usually tree derived. And so that's kind of your oak and your birch and hickory, maple. It's interesting that people always the pine that they see, that's what they kind of signify that, oh, I'm actually going to have the allergies to that. But pine actually is too big for it to be an actual allergen, but it comes out the same time that these other ones are coming out.
So it's the other trees that people tend to be more allergic to.
It's the other trees, that's correct. And then that's usually your spring, and then you get grasses that comes on later spring into the summer months. And so, that's why they don't get a break. They don't get a break because we're seeing it and it kind of continues to stay with them. And those who have what we call polysensitized means they have more than one allergy, then it goes on and they continue on suffering.
Now, you mentioned a couple of different types of tree. Mm-hmm. What do you think are the main culprits for your patients as a whole that here in North Georgia and the Atlanta area tend to get more?
It's the hardwood trees, and as we have plenty of them. So, coming from looking at oak and birch and maple, hickory, all of those are part of our repertoire of the trees that we have, and it's including many more than those, but those are the ones that we do see primarily.
And you mentioned allergy season growing, and that was the Climate Central study that came out earlier this month, and it showed 36 more days in Atlanta now per year than back in 1970.
Yes.
When do you start to see the number of patients coming in spiking or their symptoms spiking?
So it really kind of just depends on our year. If we had a cold freeze or if we had more rain, you may not see them come in as early. But this year we've actually started seeing them. I've seen, allergy sufferers start to come in even in February. We've had some who, the controlled patients are the ones who've been on their allergy medicines and things like that. We don't usually see, them coming in until probably later. But we do see the ones who are kind of new to allergy, who recently moved here the last 3 to 4 years, and now they're seeing that increase, and so they see their symptoms kind of coming on. And so we have some that kind of start to come in and say, you know what, I had symptoms in the last couple of years, I really just couldn't use the medicines, they didn't work, and so they're looking for another way of treatment.
And let's talk about those patients. If you're suffering, what should you do first to try to combat it yourself with over-the-counters before moving towards allergy shots or something?
So there's actually a lot of things now over-the-counter, and I think that it depends on the types of symptoms you have. So even if you're not thinking about allergy shots, it's still a good idea to actually speak with an allergist who's board certified trained, who can actually recognize those symptoms and kind of give you a good match for over-the-counter medicines to what your symptoms are. And we see that with, let's say you have nasal congestion, you have a lot more of the congestive symptoms. You may want to use a nasal spray. And the nasal sprays, there's so many out there over the counter. You have a lot of nasal steroid sprays, which is actually the first line recommendation. And so the ones we have are you have Flonase type medicines, that's the most well-known one, but there's also Nasacort, Nasonex, Rhinocort. So there's a lot of those. And then there's, depending on the patient, some may not be a good fit for them. And so you want sort of the aqueous ones, which are, not going to cause you as much drying because you do have those as a side effect. And so that's kind of one of the things that you can reach for is if you have congestive symptoms, think about the nasal sprays, like the nasal steroid sprays. If you've got more itching, itchy eyes, itchy skin that's kind of coming on with all the allergies you have, you may want to use an antihistamine. And so you have over-the-counter antihistamines. They're ones that are, sedating or make you sleepy. So you may want to say, okay, if I wanted to try that, I'd try it at night. So like Zyrtec or, Zylol is over-the-counter now. Those are probably your better ones that are kind of 24-hour long acting. You have the non-sedating or non-sleepy ones like Claritin or Allegra, and you can use those that don't make you as sleepy. And so those are the ones that you could gravitate towards. And then there's eye drops for allergy eyes, itchy eyes, so you can use those, and those are usually your antihistamine. I think there is the Zatador, Aloe, both are available over the counter, and there's many other ones that are available over the counter.
So over the counter stuff, you said there's 3 general categories. Can you repeat what those are?
So you have nasal steroid sprays, you have your antihistamines, and then you have your antihistamine eye drops. And I do caution on the people who try to sometimes will use like the over-the-counter red eyes, because you don't want to use those, you could get withdrawals from. You also have your decongestants that sometimes are used, especially things like Afrin, which causes withdrawal symptoms when you use them for too long, and so you want to try to be careful with those. Now there's also an antihistamine nasal spray that can be used as an add-on therapy, and so I believe that one is over the counter as well now. So there's one of those.
So if somebody is suffering symptoms, maybe they see their child suffering symptoms, what do we need to know about children's allergies, seasonal allergies here in the Atlanta area?
So we see a lot of children with allergies, and one of the things about kids and allergies is that you may not always notice the first symptoms that they have, because a lot of them may not complain about it. They might rub nose, they might rub their eyes, and they may not be, they won't complain about the congestion, because like as adults, we know how to complain about that. But what you do with children is you hear and see it. They'll rub, they do all these maneuvers to show that they have allergies, and so the parents should kind of be on the lookout for that, because if they don't notice it, it can continue on for a whole season before you even catch it, or it could cause and lead to ear problems. It could cause sinus infections. The over-the-counter medicines are similar, but their dosing is different, and so there are you have to kind of monitor how old they are and what their dosing should be for the medicines that they get as well.
So if somebody has a toddler or somebody who just started kindergarten, so they've had a few different rounds of seasonal exposure.
Yes.
You can do over-the-counters, but with little kids, isn't it important to get that doctor to really look at them?
Yes, I absolutely recommend, especially with children, to speak with your physician, especially the allergist, who can help you sort of discern what's the best dosing for your child and what's most effective. Because it may not be an antihistamine. Maybe this child could actually safely use a nasal preparation medication that can help with the congestion. And that's the things that we kind of want to talk about and kind of let the parents know, hey, yes, there are side effects, but here are some things that we're trying to weigh the risk and benefits of everything, and looking at allergy immunotherapy early on, because we know that with allergies like the allergic rhinitis symptoms, as they continue to have those symptoms, it can lead to lung issues. And so then we're looking at not just allergies, allergic rhinitis, we're also looking at asthma that could actually develop alongside the allergic rhinitis components. And so as the kids are facing this, it's such a good time for us to kind of say, let's try to stop the development of asthma, let's get these allergies under control. And this is where your allergist really can play a role here and kind of give you that, like, look, we did the testing, we see this, it's evolving, let's see what we can do to help control these allergies. And we can use medicines, we can use environmental control measures, we can look at the immunotherapy, we can look at other things that potentially can help them.
Are you seeing more kids maybe in the last 5 years come in versus 20 years ago, or is it about the same?
I think, from looking at it as our number of our patients that we're seeing, we do see a lot more pediatric now, and I think it's because it's being recognized more, and parents are wanting to get ahead of it. They want to actually say, if we've got this method that we can try to, help cure these allergies, why are we not looking at it early on? And so they're able to now, I think more parents are becoming more aware. And so I don't know that, it's because, the kids are, there's definitely an increase in the general population having allergies, and so we're seeing it more. And so it's not just in adults, the children are also affected. And so we're definitely getting that.
What about somebody who never had allergies as a kid, and all of a sudden they're saying, why am I sneezing so much? Is it possible for somebody to develop seasonal allergies later in life?
There's many scenarios where that actually happens. And so, for example, we see a lot of patients who come from different regions. And so they may not be that allergic, or to them, they may have not had a lot of symptoms because they were in the West Coast, or they were down in the Southern Florida area, or whatever location they were, and then they come and move to the Georgia area. And so now, several years of being exposed repeatedly to our seasons, then you might start seeing more symptoms. And so as they kind of come into these areas, they may notice more and more symptoms due to the fact that their exposure has changed. The type of trees, the type of, the increase days that we have also gotten them to have more symptoms then too. As we get older, we also are changing in terms of, you've got like our physical ability to adapt to the different exposures have changed. So that kind of causes patients who maybe they didn't have it when they were younger because they just didn't spend as much time doing certain activities, or they didn't have as much time for the sensitization. And so as they age, we may see that more. They may actually get more symptoms, because now they've done activities that have made that change. They have had that more exposure. exposure. So you do see those things as well. There's other things too. That's why seeing an allergist is important, because as we get older, depending on which older that means, but some of the aging population, they may see the reasons for their sneezing, maybe some completely not allergic, but maybe what we call vasomotor or non-allergic, and that's related to now that pine can cause that, or there are things that can cause them to have those symptoms, but it's hard to just sort out sometimes on your own. And so having an allergist kind of talk to you about it, really gather that history, and then do the evaluation, it can be very valuable for people to sort those things out.
And how do we know? I mean, we know it's spring, things are blooming outside, we know the pollen counts are going up. Can you just give me a brief synopsis of how do you count the pollen? You don't have to go into the full details. We did that last year.
Right.
But how do we know what the pollen count is each day?
So we actually have very dedicated staff. They are located in one of our locations, and every day they take this machine down and they literally look under the microscope and they count the number of pollen we have on their field of vision, and then they give us the number, and that is how we do it. But it is, they literally, you have a clicker, you're looking in the microscope and you're counting the number of pollen, and we're counting, each pollen has a special look under the microscope, and so they count the number of tree pollen that they see, they count the number of grass pollen they see, they count the number of weed pollens, and they report this, every day, for us to be able to look at and say, okay, this is the number. The machine collects it, and so there's different machines, that the rotorod is one of them. They just spin all day long and collect the amount of pollen that's in the air, and then they bring that machine down and count it.
And when do we see pollen season for tree pollens peak here in Atlanta?
So our peak can vary depending on what happened, our winters, because if we had a very high, a kind of a freeze, a longer freeze period, we kind of had a later freeze this year, and so we may expect that our peak may delay a little bit. And what's interesting is that when that happens, usually we'll peak probably closer to March, April period of time. We'll see a lot of peak in that time. But what we also see is that these little small spikes in our pollen counts, where we're already counting pretty high, it primes our patients. So they get symptomatic, and then they have just these small symptoms, and then the body takes care of it. But then when the next one comes right behind it, and we get a bigger flare of their exposure, they get more symptoms and they get quicker reaction. And so that's what you're seeing sometimes, is that you get these little small spurts and the people deal with it, and then we get these bigger exposures, and that's that priming effect that happens. And so
if somebody is a seasonal allergy sufferer for tree pollens, not grass or weed, ragweed, when do we start to see the numbers coming down? When can they expect a little bit of relief?
So usually you've got March, April, probably the end of April, May, and then you might start seeing grass comes in. And so if they're isolated in trees, a lot of times it'll be until the mid-May, I would say, is in the safe range. But what's interesting is because our weather has been changing, our pattern is changing, and so even some of the tree allergic guys, we've seen trees come out in the fall. And so while trees always hits the news in the spring, we're seeing them in different times of the year too. And so we want patients to kind of understand it's, you got to know where your allergens are, because by tracking it and seeing it, you'll be able to follow it better, and you'll be able to know when you're supposed to, expect your symptoms to rise, and also use medicines appropriately, or do something a little bit, kind of more helpful.
Thank you. And can I close with this? Can you just kind of give me your elevator speech? If somebody's starting to sneeze and watery eyes, a couple of nuggets of what should you do? What's the most important thing in allergy season?
So during allergy season, I always recommend, let's get your exposures down. So if you've got to be outside, try and be outside in the evening time, because usually the, morning and the afternoon is when the pollen is really high. And then make sure you kind of rinse your nose out. Make sure you shower at night so you don't sleep with your pollen. And then, use over-the-counter medicines. You've got nasal steroid sprays. You've got antihistamines for that. You've got allergy drops that you can use. And if those things are not working, absolutely see an allergist. You can even see an allergist before that, so you can get a way to actually do the prevention, and then talk about other ways to kind of decrease your symptoms throughout the season. I always think about allergies for allergy shots to be curative, to prevent further allergy kind of complications, including sinus infections, ear infections, asthma exacerbations. So those are all things that we can kind of try to stop and help everybody with their allergies.
Thank you, Dr. Lilly Hwang with Atlanta Allergy and Asthma. You have been a huge depth of knowledge for us. Thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.